What's going on, everybody? Mortium here, this time bringing you a video about Vrising, the open world action RPG meets survival base builder where you play as a vampire. But before we dive into all that, I do need to inform you that this video is in fact sponsored by Stunlock Studios, the game's developer and publisher. A sponsorship I chose to accept because I've followed Vrising through its early access journey, which brings us to its full launch today, where we'll be going over both the basics and some of the new stuff specific to the 1.0 release. With that exact thing in mind, if you're interested in what you see here and you want to take a look at Vrising for yourself, there will be a link in the description below where you'll find the game available on Steam, with the game also coming to PlayStation 5 but later this year. Now with that out of the way, let's talk a bit about Vrising. As I mentioned, we play as a vampire. We're going to be doing vampire related things such as dominating humans, turning them into servants, building up our own gothic castle, and plenty of other things you'd probably expect from something like this, but that's not the only thing we'll be doing. You see, there is a bit of a story to this game, and the events that are transpiring, and why we awoke from our slumber. So let's set the stage a bit. Once upon a time, vampires ruled this land. Humans had been driven almost to the brink of extinction, but several vampire civil wars bought humans enough time to just so happen to discover the sources of the light in their fervent prayers for salvation, which led to the establishment of the Church of Luminance. Using this brand new and devastating power to vampires, they were effectively driven back, many of which were simply forced to hide in the darkness, until such a time as things could be changed. Now, one of those vampires that this included just so happened to be Dracula. And what spurred this monumental defeat on the part of the vampires is Dracula's death. However, his death triggered a blood rain that lasted for days. This blood went on to infect both the land and its people, so even with the gains and establishments made by humans in the aftermath, there are absolutely people being granted tremendous power by this tainted blood that fell from the sky, or V-blood if you prefer, which is what the game refers to it as. So the other aspect of gameplay here that we'll be partaking in while we're simply trying to make our way as a vampire is to track down carriers of this V-blood and take them out, which grants us access to progression in the form of unlocks for our castle, as well as specific powers such as being able to turn into a wolf for faster movement speed, or a bear to break down certain obstacles, and later even more specific stuff. Now with that out of the way, let's actually talk about what playing this game entails, which starts with first, of course, creating a game. And your first decision on that point is to play in an online game, a private game, or host a dedicated server, as this game supports both multiplayer and single-player modes. It is possible to play this game entirely solo, completely on your own, but there is a big multiplayer aspect to it, which can be either co-op or PvP related, and thus you can join an online realm to do that in a more traditional server fashion, or simply host your own private game where you can play with people on your own terms, or just enjoy the game solo. Now, a third option there is that you can either rent or simply set up your own personal server to play the game on, which I think is a pretty cool option. Now, assuming you're setting up your own game, you're going to have some options in relation to the difficulty and the settings for the world. Now, the game has 3 base difficulties: relaxed, normal, and brutal, which are of course general determinations that decide how hard the game is and how hard enemies are going to hit you, for example. But we also have the advanced game settings. This includes basic things like how many players are allowed in the game, whether or not PvP is enabled or is it just purely PvE, the multipliers on all sorts of things such as the cost to build things, how much loot drops from enemies, the specifics of how leveling your castle up via its castle heart will work. So there's a lot of ways to affect the difficulty of the game outside of just the difficulty options here. And if you're playing on your own, you can customize all of this to your heart's content, which will make the game, of course, easier or much harder if you prefer. So once you're done deciding where and how you'll play, you'll eventually, of course, need to create our character. This game does feature a cosmetic character creation that lets you choose what type of vampire you would like to play, and while it is of course heavily stylized, there are more than a few options here that should let you hit the ground running with a character you enjoy looking at. What's more though, you can actually change this later if you don't like your final product, as it were. Once you get your castle going, you'll be able to build mirrors at a certain point, and looking into that mirror will allow you to change your appearance. But once you're finally out into the world, let's start talking about it. So right away, the game does have a small objective system that will help guide you along your journey through the world, fighting off the various V monsters and building up your castle. So if you're ever kind of worried you won't know what to do or what to focus on, that is there to help sort of keep you on track in terms of overall progression, though you are otherwise free to do as you please. Also worth a mention that the map of the game is set, but it does have some dynamic elements to it, which we'll get to. But overall, we're going to be gathering resources to build up our castle before tracking down those V-Blood monsters. So when it comes to building our castle, if you've ever played a building style game, you'll be familiar with a lot of the general mechanics, such as, of course, simply harvesting resources, utilizing various tools, which also, in this case, form the weapons we can use, which have unique attacks associated with them, but they're also better or worse at gathering certain resources. Once you have enough resources, you'll go to a plot of land on the world map. As part of the Secrets of Gloomrot update last year, they overhauled the available map space in terms of where you can build your castles. All of these plots that you see on the actual map are places you could go to set down your castle heart, which is the foundation of where your castle exists. There are tons to choose from, and they're all over the map, and what's more, with the 1.0 release, you can actually move these, that is to say your entire castle later on, if you'd like to relocate. Speaking for myself, though, I like a nice centrally located castle right in roughly the middle of the map. But another cool thing about that Secrets of Gloomrot update is it allowed the ability for you to build multi-level castles. So once you start building actual castle walls and you enclose a room, it builds a roof, which would normally make a single layer. However, you can also build stairs and the like, which will allow you to form a second story to your castle, expanding that space upwards, which is another thing you might want to keep in mind when searching for that perfect plot of land to put down a castle. When you are ready, you'll put down your castle heart, which is the very first thing you'll build to effectively claim the land as your own. Now, the castle heart does need to be powered by blood essence, which you'll get by simply fighting a lot of enemies, but also one of the things we can build is a blood press where we can throw things like the hearts of our enemies to extract specific blood essences to fuel this thing, as well as some of our crafting. Now, from there, you'll get to it, putting down initially very bare bones palisade walls and likely resource refinement machines such as a sawmill to turn wood into planks and start building your castle up. From there, though, I would say that it is a mostly self-explanatory system, with you unlocking more and more things as you take on your V-Blood enemies, which is the other thing I want to talk about, because one of the things you'll be crafting along the way is, of course, upgraded gear, which is going to provide you the gear level you need to fight these V-Blood related enemies. So it's a bit of a back and forth system where you'll upgrade your equipment to get the level you need to fight these enemies, and then those enemies will fuel the further unlocks you need to then advance your equipment and progress the game farther. If you're paying attention, these V-Blood enemies are not random and usually have a role to play in the larger world and the subplot with Dracula. Now, when it comes to finding these V-Blood enemies, you don't have to do too much, as once you are ready to do so, the game allows you to track them, which will give you a general indicator from your character in this sort of smoky blood funnel that leads you to their location, where you then fight them. These are effectively boss fights. They start off relatively simple, but as the game progresses and you fight more difficult ones, they start to incorporate more and more mechanics, which can lead to some pretty satisfying fights. But upon defeating them, in addition to unlocking further crafting in your castle, you'll also occasionally unlock abilities. This takes both the form of general vampire abilities, such as transformations into certain animals, which can help you with traversal, and magic. So defeating certain enemies will unlock an unlock point for a specific magic school, which lets you unlock a bunch of magical abilities that you'll then be able to use in combat for yourself. There are many different schools of magic. They've added ultimate abilities and passive benefits that can increase your character overall as well, which, in addition to the gear and weapon abilities, adds an extra layer to the overall combat. Now, that isn't the only thing you'll be doing in Vrising. You see, the world is a static map, but it does have some dynamic elements. And beyond just dynamic elements, there's also just some really cool stuff to find generally, like the very recently added Castlevania event that puts none other than Simon Belmont in the game as one of the boss battles you can partake in. Although, as expected, he's a pretty high-level enemy and will destroy the unprepared or ungeared vampire. But let's talk a little bit about those dynamic events. So this includes more general things like, say, traveling caravans that will now obviously travel the roads that you can take out and loot just for your own use, but also enemies that don't really get along. Believe it or not, you're not the only danger out here. Sometimes you'll find enemies fighting each other, such as the undead and human settlers, and on rare occasion you might even find some V-Blood enemies fighting each other, as some of them do roam around the map and thus can come into contact with other enemies. And that's to say nothing of other aspects of the world, such as I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, it is possible to dominate humans at a certain point in the game and force them into servitude and thus perform tasks for you around your castle, or simply defend it from either invading players or enemies who wander a little too close. And while most humans will in fact attack you on sight, it's possible later to get an actual human form, on top of simply meeting dubious merchants who don't really care to deal with vampires, and as long as you have the coin, they will happily sell you resources and the like. But what I haven't mentioned up to this point is that first and foremost you are a vampire, which means you need blood and you need to avoid the sun. So you might have noticed throughout this video that I'm either feeding on people or that I have a blood pool in the bottom middle of the screen. Running out of blood will slowly drain your health down to 1 point and make you a very easy target to kill. And you can also use your blood pool to heal damage, provided of course you can get the heal off without being attacked. Now we're going to get this blood by of course feeding on other creatures. This involves whittling them down to low health before taking their blood as your own, though you might want to wait until it's the last enemy standing, as you can be attacked while you are feeding, which can make you a little bit vulnerable during that moment. Now what you feed on is also important because blood quality is part of this game as well, with it being divided both into types of blood and then the quality of that blood specifically. So each enemy will have a type of blood. This is important because it then conveys specific bonuses based on that type and the quality, with quality being represented by a 0 to 100% mark, and essentially the better the quality, the better the bonuses you get tied to that particular type of blood. So unsurprisingly, a well-fed vampire is incredibly strong. Now before we wrap this video up, I do want to talk a little bit about the brand new zone and endgame added to the title, as the 1.0 release, in addition to several other things I've mentioned here, also brings with it the brand new final area of the game, the ruins of Mortium, the seat of Dracula himself, who has risen to reclaim his blood and thus the land after regaining his power following his defeat. In addition to simply being a very high-level area with new enemies and the like to conquer, there's also a little more going on here as well, as the ruins of Mortium are plagued by both vampire minions but also the legions of Noctum, Dracula's personal legion, who is quite active in the new area, performing all sorts of rituals to draw more troops from the Shadow Realm, which forms a late-game dynamic event called Rift Incursions. You'll essentially be able to interrupt and capitalize upon these specific regions, which is also going to give you a specific shard resource that then allows you to purchase or unlock the passive magic benefits I mentioned earlier, alongside artifact weapons that you'll have to piece together in your pursuit to gain more and more power before taking the fight to Dracula himself. So all of that, alongside all sorts of brand new armor, gear, weapons, combat abilities, and the like, awaits you in Vrising 1.0. If any of that just so happens to interest you and you'd like to enjoy the irony of bringing your undead vampire fantasy to life, then by all means do remember to check out the link below to learn more about the game on Steam, with it coming to PS5 later on this year. But that is pretty much going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this look at the game. Do let me know what you think of it down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.